welcome to today's episode of Tea and Talks. We will be your three hosts for the day.
Hello, I'm Omema.
Hi, my name is Imaan.
And my name is Lina. Just before we continue, we wanted to state that unfortunately last week we were unable to host our show, but that was due to some technical difficulties which should hopefully be all resolved now, so it should run smoothly.
Okay, so today we'll be talking about mental health and how it is perceived in current times. So personally, I think mental health is all about how you react, feel, and deal with situations, sometimes social situations. But I think overall it's about your own mental well-being.
Yeah, I think the way you described it is a pretty universal way of understanding, because with mental health, the term itself is used to refer to an individual's condition in regards to their psychological and emotional well-being.
Yeah, I think it's just kind of what the name states itself. It goes more than just physical well-being. I mean, it can be physical, it can be portrayed physically, but it is kind of about more of your internal health, if that makes sense.
And how one feels personally. I think you did mention something about statistics prior to
Yeah,
that.
I think the craziest thing is that 1 in 4 people experience mental health, and I know when you get numbers thrown at you, you don't really tend to care, but when you put that into perspective, let's say in a family of 5, 1 of you will or have experienced mental health, or in a classroom of 20 people, 5 people will have experienced mental health, or not even that alone in this room. There's the 3 of us here, and then there's a couple of the behind the scenes crew, and I think 1 of us here has experienced mental health or will experience mental health, and I think that's kind of this. It's
It does
quite
go to show that
unfortunate.
it can be very prominent, doesn't it?
Yeah, I think when you do give those kind of stats, it kind of it's like, well, like you don't realise that family and friend members, like they might have mental health issues and you might not even know about it.
Can go unnoticed. And on the topic of things going unnoticed, I do want to say that I think a large contributor to that fact is how mental health has kind of been viewed as almost a trend nowadays. And given the way it's been used recently, I'm not surprised why people who do have mental health issues and do suffer with these disorders feel more reluctant to open up and speak about them, because they now have that fear of appearing as though they're either making things up, they're seeking attention, or they're just being very dramatic.
Yeah, that's actually the point that I wanted to make. I feel like everyone it's just being overused and misused in ways that it shouldn't be, and people just kind of throw the term around and they don't understand what it actually means. For example, if you think of people might say, "Oh, I'm feeling so depressed," or "Oh, you're so OCD," just because someone's having a bad day, or just because you might be overly kind of organised, and people just kind of throw it around and they don't understand the weight that the words come with, and I think they think that they're just kind of words which are just decorated very nicely to express things that it doesn't mean, because it's more than just, feeling organised or being upset for the day. So, yeah.
It definitely isn't. I think, like you said, using the example you gave of OCD, I think just focusing on that now, OCD in itself has become something that's viewed as almost a personality quirk in a sense.
It belittles it as well.
Exactly, and I think, this is so far from the case, because with OCD, it's so much more than just a minor addition to your personality. It is a serious and devastating disorder that can have really detrimental impacts on the lives of those who are affected with it. So it is much more than it tends to be made out to be now.
Yeah, and I think that mental health in general is spoken about a lot, but I think most of the time it's spoken about in the wrong way. Like the term has started to get abused now and used in unnecessary conversations, and it's started to put people who actually suffer with mental illness down, and they don't want to open about it for this reason.
That's true, and I think focusing back on OCD, one of the really big problems that people with OCD suffer with is, of course, the obsessive compulsions. That's what the disorder is based around. Now, if I'll hand over to Omema to speak a bit more about those compulsions.
Yeah, it's kind of like people might feel like they don't feel kind of calmed if they haven't fulfilled these certain things. Like, for example, let's say I couldn't leave the house if I hadn't left that, like, hadn't switched all the lights off, I wouldn't feel comfortable, and I'd kind of feel anxious if I hadn't done it. So I might go back, do it all over again, just so I feel kind of a bit more relaxed. And if you think of, obviously that's more of like a minimal example, it would be more intense, but if you think of that constantly happening to someone, especially sometimes people might hide it and they might keep it secret because they don't want other people to kind of judge them or look at them strangely and think, you know, why are you doing that? So I think it's quite, it's like on them, it would be quite.
No, it definitely would be. And another thing about those compulsions is with OCD in general, even not just the compulsions itself, people can end up suffering physical harm from them. So it really is extremely serious.
So what do you mean by physical harm? Like, isn't OCD just a mental illness?
Well, the physical damage is what ensues as a result of the obsessive compulsions. So to give an example, let's say someone had an OCD that was based around contamination. So they may be so obsessed with constantly cleaning and disinfecting themselves to the point they could be scrubbing their body and end up ripping or damaging their skin because of how harshly or how consistently they're doing it. And as a result, this may cause red and raw bleeding skin, just as one example of physical damage.
Well, like, I actually didn't know that. Like, in some severe cases of OCD, people do turn to substance abuse, like alcohol abuse and drug abuse. And I think this just shows to people who thought it was just trying to be perfect, that it can be so much more severe than
Yeah,
it
OCD
actually
is
seems.
definitely a lot more than just being overly organised about something. And I think when people understand that more, and you know, it's put into perspective more just how much it can affect our daily lives, it makes much more of a almost awakening in a sense, because you're able to realise more, oh, this isn't something I should just mess around with, just joke around with. It's something that people really do suffer from.
To be fair, I'm not surprised that people would turn to kind of substance abuse, because if you think of how much stress you'd be put under, you want to kind of find a way to manage that stress. On top of that, though, you're being judged because you're turning to substance abuse, and people might think that you don't care, which is, it makes it even worse, because then first you're scared because you're being judged, because people might think you're just being weird because you've got that mental illness, and then you're judged because you've turned to kind of substance abuse. And I think it's just quite, it's like a continuous thing of
It is,
people
it's a
kind
continuous
of looking,
cycle, isn't it? Yeah, I think, you know, as Omema said, it definitely is going to be very, when you try and look in from the perspective of people who do suffer with OCD, it does affect them, and you know, it can play into their own personal lives a lot. When you think of that overwhelming stress, and as a result, you
It
know, this can
correlates
affect
with
things
everything.
such as, say, their education in general, or perhaps the quality of life as a result of maybe having to be unable to devote oneself to relationships, and especially family life, I think. Because with family life, let's say someone does suffer with OCD, it may result in their family members having to start altering things in their own personal lives just to cater to the needs of that person with OCD. And this will not only cause the person to feel extremely guilty, but it would also have a knock-on effect on the family, of course, because that type of thing isn't going to be really easy to maintain, is it?
I think it just shows how stressful this disorder can actually be, and how detrimental it can be to people who suffer with it. And I think now we've actually discussed it and how severe it can actually go, people do need to start throwing the term around when it can have a detrimental impact on people who do suffer with it.
Yeah, you know, on that note though, the whole throwing terms around, as we stated before, isn't purely subjective to OCD. This happens with so many different mental illnesses. And another one that I think gets thrown across quite a lot and just tossed around and misused a lot is social anxiety, because lots of people have kind of subjected this to simply being shy, or it's not a glamorized term for being shy, as Omema stated a while ago. It's something that is very serious, and again, it can have a really drastic effect on the lives of those who suffer with it.
No, sure. I was just going to say, like, they just think that obviously, you know, it's not going to have a name, and then it just kind of means that you're going to be shy. It's going to be more than that, and people just, it's kind of disrespectful in a way. And I know, well, let's be serious, we've all done it. We have. But if you are watching this, you know it's wrong. Don't do it again. But it is quite, like, think of it, if someone was just sitting there and you threw it around like that, they might not feel as kind of comfortable, if that makes sense, and they wouldn't feel like they can maybe talk about it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely true. And I think another thing about social anxiety is that, it's definitely something that will affect people to the point where it may halt their own personal relationships, wouldn't it?
They might not feel like they can interact with other people, and because of that, once again, they also might hide it so they don't have to.
Yeah, because they will end up avoiding social interaction or something.
Yeah, and I think when you do avoid most social situations or all of them, it does obviously, it's going to have an impact on your personal relationships. And in some cases, they just can't start to develop personal relationships because of the severe social anxiety. So I think, again, it just shows how severe social anxiety can actually be.
Yeah, I think we had a couple of questions about that. Didn't we?
Oh yeah, one was, what are the causes of social anxiety and how do people actually develop it?
Right, so with social anxiety, as far as I know, there are some physical symptoms.
Obviously, like, these are dependable on the person because
Yeah.
it happens differently for everybody, but these are just kind of
Yeah,
general
of course. And the listed symptoms they gave, the ones I knew at least, it's ones that I'm not entirely sure are really, they're not, well, they can be applied to many other illnesses and many other conditions, or even just general behaviour, because the ones I mentioned was things such as fast heartbeats, blushing, I believe, and then sweating and trembling. But these are just symptoms that are more common, so I wouldn't say they're very easy to diagnose someone with or try.
Yeah, like if you do have some of those symptoms, it doesn't mean it's straight away social anxiety. Like with other disorders, you can have the same.
Yeah, you can have the same
symptoms.
Yeah. Another cause behind the social anxiety, though, is in some cases it can be genetic. So what I mean by this is there can be a few causes behind, in the sense it's a psychiatric disorder, so it's something that can be heritable due to a combination of different genetic and environmental factors. So to summarise, it's basically something that can be passed down from your parents if they suffer with it.
No, and I know another cause is kind of like to do with just your brain and your brain structure. That's not me saying, oh, there's something wrong with your brain. That's just saying, for example, let's say Imaan's afraid of spiders and we're not.
She actually is, yeah.
And she might respond to seeing a spider, like her fear would be different to ours. She might be really afraid of it, but then we might not be. So that's just saying that her response is more heightened and ours is more kind of just regular. So that's what I mean by brain structure. Like someone might, their emotions or their feelings or their responses to things might be heightened compared to others. So
yeah, and just to emphasise a bit more on that, the particular part of their brain Omema was referring to is basically called the limbic system, which is what controls our emotional and behavioural responses. And it's basically just a group of interconnected structures, and it's located deep within our brain. So it's not that there's something wrong with you it's a cause that you develop due to brain structure. It's just purely the way your brain's structured. So we're not trying to say that at all.
yeah, she loves a good brag.
Well, also there is actually a association between social anxiety and people whose parents are overprotective or kind of show that anxiety in social situations. So obviously there's that influence there when you see your parents kind of being a bit in social situations.
Yeah, because I think if in the case of parents being very overprotective, you're constantly being given the ideologies of this is really dangerous, that's really dangerous. It's natural for a child to begin to really
Because that's all you know, so you just learn from that.
You kind of develop your own sense of that extreme anxiety, and I think it can lead on to social anxiety as a course of development. But
there was actually another question, which was, is there any physical symptoms of social anxiety?
I actually answered some of that earlier, but again, the symptoms I said were quite generic, really, because they can apply to other things. So if any of you know any that's more specific.
Obviously, it's not always going to be physical, but for physical things, I know a friend that they experience social anxiety, and sometimes they might feel quite sickly and they might be a bit nauseous. So I think that's one of them, or like shortness of breath, like things like that. So I think that's it.
Another thing that people don't actually know is that social anxiety can actually cause panic attacks due to that overwhelming sense of fear and anxiety. And I think this again shows how severe social anxiety and all of these disorders that we may not put down but not see them as so severe can actually be.
Yeah, I think as for physical symptoms, I think that's about all that we know collectively. But were there any more questions on that topic? Or
There was one more actually, which was how can you overcome social anxiety?
So with questions like this, all we can actually do is echo what other professionals and specialists have said, because speaking on our behalf, the three of our behalf, sorry, neither of us have the relevant knowledge, nor do we have the experience, because we've never suffered with any mental health
And every
issues.
situation is different as well, so you may respond to things differently that other people might respond to things. Things might just not work for you, so...
Yeah, and so we can only give you what other specialists have advised, as we stated. So, Omema, if you have anything.
You clearly don't have anything, do you?
No.
Yeah,
I've got
always.
nothing.
I don't know. You could write things down. I know a lot of people say just write your feelings down. I know, like...
Oh, that's something that's been advised, actually.
Why would you... If some people think, like, why would you go through the effort of just writing something down? But when you think of it, like, when you write stuff down, it's not that you're detaching yourself from it, but you kind of get to see it more. So because you get to see it more, you kind of get to not come in contact with it, but understand it more.
Yeah, I think...
I think like with people who don't necessarily want to speak to someone in person, it can help them still getting out what they want, how they feel, or what they want to say.
Communicating through the writing instead of having to say it verbally. Yeah, that's definitely a really good thing to do, I'd say, and it's very important, because something I actually thought about quite a few days ago was not just with social anxiety, but just when you're experiencing a problem in general, if you're only going to be able to really find a solution to that problem if you can understand it properly. And when you write things down, it kind of enables you to almost decipher each part and properly analyse your issues or your problems, and then work out a logical solution.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a good thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's because when you're actually visualising it, it's not all scattered kind of in your brain, and you're not affected by other things that you might be thinking of. But
And I think another way you can try and overcome your social anxiety is by
Is this what you said earlier? Because you mentioned focusing on what people actually say.
you should focus on what people are actually trying to say instead of presuming the worst thing.
wait,
or
what
the
does that?
most negative thing.
How does that link? What
So
does it mean by
say
social?
when someone's making a comment, instead of thinking straight away the most negative option, you should try and, like, all of us do it, like I know I do it sometimes. I think it's something that everyone should try and do instead of just presuming the worst.
Yeah, that's definitely something very important. But there was another disorder, because I think we're a bit short on time, so I think we just move to that now. It's another disorder that we wanted to mention because we feel it's something that has also been tossed around a lot more in recent times, and that is, it may come as a surprise, but that's PTSD. Now, for those who may be unaware, PTSD is an abbreviation for post-traumatic stress disorder. Now, with this disorder, it's obviously a mental health condition that is caused by one's experience of something that's been very traumatic to them. And with PTSD, you can experience things such as nightmares, flashbacks to that traumatic experience, and you can even be bombarded with an array of memories at sudden points. And it's almost like you're being haunted by that experience in a sense.
Yeah, so with PTSD, it can be like set up by certain things like the senses, so say the smell or something like hear. So for example, last Thursday, unfortunately, one of our friends got hit by a car, and
What?
No, yeah, she actually did. But she only broke her elbow, but obviously it could have been a lot worse. And obviously she hasn't been in school because like she doesn't want to cross the road because obviously she's gonna be, is that gonna happen to me again? Or every time she hears like a loud noise, she thinks it's a car just coming. And so I think it can be, so it can have such a huge impact on someone's life.
Yeah, I feel like because you're constantly kind of reliving that moment over and over again, and it could just come instantly, because like you said, she might hear noises and think, oh, it's happening all over again.
Yeah.
So you're just kind of constantly going back to that feeling of just trauma or chaos or whatever it may have been in that moment. And I think sometimes they do pop up in kind of unrelated ways where you're not thinking about it or you've not heard something, but it's just kind of overwhelmed you, like, out of nowhere, if that makes sense.
And I think with PTSD, it's like, it is go, like everywhere you go, say when you went to school, you went to the shop, it's always going to be there with
Something
you.
that lingers.
Yeah, literally.
I think with PTSD again, I know we did get a couple of questions saying how can you tackle PTSD and what's the best way to try and approach it. And again, as we stated previously, it's not something we can really actually advise on because we don't have that knowledge or experience. But what I do know, as far as we've read about and according to the research we did, when it comes to PTSD, most people will access therapy. And in most cases, I believe the therapy has been able to allow these people who do suffer with PTSD to find some way to almost reconstruct that memory or learn to cope with it. So we would say that therapy, of course, according to what we've researched, is the most, not the most, but one of the very effective ways there is.
Yeah, I think it just goes to show, like, even if you don't think it's going to help or there's no point, it is important that you do reach out help if you feel like you've got a mental illness.
Especially when you're like keeping it to yourself. Sometimes
And it can get worse.
sometimes all you do need is just kind of to talk about it and to understand it and to kind of understand why you constantly keep going back to that
I think
moment.
with PTSD, in some situations, some people might have that traumatic experience that they link to a lot of personal guilt, given the situation. Of course, this varies between what may have happened for each individual person, but a lot of the time when they're able to talk to people about it, it helps people almost stop blaming themselves in a sense. So that external help is definitely very crucial, I think, and it's something that we should, if you are suffering from it, I would really say please do try and seek help or just talk to someone because it's something that you really should try to do. I think we had another question, did we not?
Oh yeah, so it was actually a topic suggestion, sorry, and someone asked whether we could cover bipolar disorder.
Right. So, Omema.
You just keep throwing everything at me. God, I'm not prepared. I think with bipolar, everyone tends to think that it's just you flipping between personalities, and I think that's what people think the base bipolar is. But I think obviously it's more than that. It's not just people going between different personalities. But when you think of like how stressful that can be, constantly kind of maybe fluctuating, let's say it's between depression and elation, you're constantly fluctuating between the two because they're the most common. It's gonna kind of have a toll on you coping with them to intensity
And
levels.
even your family members, like if you're going to be around them all the time, you'll be like, it'll be a bit hard for you to deal with someone who actually suffers with bipolar.
Yeah, definitely. And I think to elaborate on this just a little more for the viewers, as Omema stated, you may reach a very high mood and, be extremely happy or joyful, but then for absolutely no specified reason, you suddenly fall into this very low period and you have a very low sense of emotions and very negative emotions, and that is what correlates with bipolar disorder. And another thing is, speaking in a more generalized term, I think as people we tend to find it difficult to make such regulating or distinct decisions about our own lives in general. So when you pair that with someone who's suffering between two of their own states of mind and constantly falling between different variations of their mental state, I think it does make a lot of sense, and that you can understand a lot more why it may be very difficult for these people to find healthy and balanced lifestyles. So going off those points that we've stated, I wanted to say, it's definitely things that shouldn't just be so easily thrown around in terms of the actual terms itself, like bipolar disorder, OCD, etc., because they are very serious and they can be very detrimental.
Yeah, I think with disorders like these, like they could occur in people who seem totally functioning and actual contributing members of society. So I think that kind of, although it may seem like a positive, it kind of shows that people can suffer with mental illness.
And you'd have no idea.
Yeah.
And they might, just because they're not saying it doesn't mean that they're not going through it. And I think that's kind of because it's so internal and it's all around us at the same time, it is kind of hard to cope with. And I think that's why people do belittle it, because it's not physically evident. So that's why people might think it's not as maybe important as other illnesses or other diseases, because it doesn't count in that sense.
Yeah, and I think we just wanted to, before we wrap up, we just want to state again that, we hope that through this episode we were able to maybe shed a little bit more light on why these disorders are each very important and they're very severe, because it's not things that you should use as a joke, you know, just saying, oh, to you it may seem harmless in the moment when you're joking with your friend and you may say, oh, she's so bipolar, but to the people who actually suffer with that disorder, it won't be a joke to them, and it's very insensitive. And I think we all as people need to learn to understand more about things that would affect the lives of others, because it can help us be able to have much more of an understanding and be much more not even sympathetic, but just generally behave and conduct ourselves in a much more pleasant manner, I think.
I think we need to, instead of just always blurting things out, be cautious of what you're saying and consider what you're saying. Not even just around who you're saying it, because like we said, it might be evident, it might not be, but just be careful with what you're saying, because you shouldn't just be throwing things around like that if you don't understand what they mean.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, I think there's so many things that you can use as ways to find humour. Mental health is not supposed to be the centre of that. So if we can all not joke about things like this anymore, it would make even just society as a whole, to be very blunt, progress maybe that little bit further, because again, mental health is not your point of amusement, and I'm sorry, but if anyone tries to say, oh, it's just a joke, there are so many jokes in the world that you can use, and someone's state and someone's suffering should not be one of them. Anything you'd like to say? Thank you, thank you.
No, I think,
Yeah, I think that's
I think that's covered for now. But again, we hope that this episode has helped a little. And please do feel free to send us any suggestions for our next episodes, as it's all about what our audience would like to hear. So I think that concludes our show for today. Please join us next Wednesday, as long as we have no technical issues again. Join us next Wednesday for our next show. Thank you for watching, and we hope to see you soon.